Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto rebuilt the Uzumaki clan with Ino, Sakura, Karin, and Hinata, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Ino smiled at Naruto for a bit before taking off towards the more shinobi-oriented section of the store, while leaving Naruto to gush over his new Haori. After a few minutes, Naruto realized that Ino was gone and he was standing in the middle of the store, staring at himself in a mirror while admiring his body and how good he looked. The blonde rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and coughed awkwardly before taking off through the store in search of Ino. 20 minutes later, Naruto now stood in front of the cashier with 3 carts worth of clothing for Ino and Karin, and a bit for himself. Karin and Ino were starry-eyed when they heard Naruto say that he was going to pay for everything. Looking back at his 2 female companions to make sure he doesn't see Gama-chan cry, he felt his sadness disappear. Ino stood with a pair of short shorts and a thin purple blouse. The colors accentuated her body and her skin tone, making her seem somewhat promiscuous for a lack of better words. Karin, though, wore a thin long-sleeved jacket and a thin blue undershirt that filled out nicely, showing off her true chest size, making Naruto's face turn red, even though he'd already seen her. To be frank, Naruto was surprised that women like them would even be seen with him, hero or not. Even though he's already saved the village from catastrophe, he felt that he still wasn't worthy of any relationships. Come to think of it, Naruto didn't know what he was with Ino. The girl seemed to like him, of course, but Karin also seemed to like him. Then he also had to deal with Hinata and Sakura. Naruto wanted to collapse and rub his head until all of his problems vanished. Looking away, he trailed his head upwards and stared at the ceiling. Naruto-sama. Naruto paid no heed and continued to stare aimlessly at the ceiling. Completely mesmerized by the patterns in the ceiling tiles, Naruto didn't even acknowledge the cashier. He simply kept his eyes glued to the ceiling. Naruto-kun, Ino tapped him in his shoulder. Still no response. Now, Naruto was in a deep trance about things related to ramen and for some unforeseen reason, chicken. Baka Naruto, Karin roared, scaring Naruto back into reality. Naruto-sama, your receipt. The cashier looked at the hero with a bewildered expression. Thank you for shopping. Ah, yes. Thank you. Naruto turned around and had some shadow clones carry the bags out of the store. The 3 were now walking down the street towards Ino's house since it was on the way. He had a small squad of 10 clones carrying their bags right behind them, while he conversed with the 2 girls at his sides. His clones grumbled each step since each clone had at least 4 bags in each hand. Through the journey, Karin took notice of the world around her, and for a second, she thought she felt a small tingle of love come from Naruto's heart. With each emotion memorized and studied and given a different color for future reference, Karin knew that it was love. Since love didn't have a color, it was too pure. Karin felt his emotions calm her down once more. Ever since yesterday, before everything went black, she realized that Naruto's peacefulness in his chakra has become much more potent because of the presence of Ino. Karin fixed her broken glasses and sighed at how distorted and disgusting everything looked through her eyes. Karin frowned slightly and looked around only to see cracked images. If she took off her glasses she knew that she wouldn't see a thing, and it would be just as bad as looking through her ruined glasses, but at least she could see right. The group stopped and Ino gave Naruto a kiss on the cheek and walked over to Karin and gave her a small hug while motioning for 5 of the clones to follow the blonde into her house. Karin and Naruto smiled softly and burst into a small bout of laughter. With the remaining 5 clones following behind, they quickly headed towards their condo. Without much to say, the 2 start taking out their clothes and putting them away and folding them. Karin even broke into song trying to kill time. With fewer clothes than Ino had, the 2 finished their arranging and folding rather quickly. As of now, Karin sat with a bowl of ramen in her hands and the television remote right next to her. She was watching a game show from the capital of crazy people trying to run an obstacle course without any formal training or chakra. Karin giggled and laughed as various traps were sprung, sending various objects at the contestants, sending them into the waters below. The bedroom door swung open and out walked a shirtless Naruto with only a towel covering his lower extremities. He had a toothbrush in his mouth as he swiftly walked through the main hall of their condo, completely ignoring the frozen Karin. The redhead stared at the muscled and surprisingly scarred shinobi walking in past her. Even though the two of them have lived together, she has never seen him without a shirt since he'd always make sure she wasn't looking or even go so far as to make her close her eyes before he'd enter a room where he needed something. But now, Karin was surprised by the sudden change in routine. She examined his body and found that it was more defined and muscular than Sasuke's, but the most defining feature of his chest was the two scars on his chest, both of them just centimeters from his heart. Naruto stopped and looked at Karin for a few seconds without any words being said. His face heated up as did Karin's as they both realized that they were staring at each other. Karin was wearing some yoga pants that fit her form perfectly and a thin V-neck t-shirt that showed a bit too much cleavage, whereas Naruto had left a bit too much crack in the part of the towel that covered his manhood. Karin spit out her noodles and coughed slightly and shot her head to face the TV. Naruto hurried away and into the confines of his bedroom, which was actually Karin's. 2 hours and a half later, Karin sighed after realizing that Naruto was off training like he normally did at this time of day. She sat her bowl down onto the table in front of her and crossed her arms underneath her chest and grumbled silently. She pushed her ruined glasses up her face and looked around for something to keep her mind off of her lack of company. She looked at her watch and the clock on the wall. Hinata was off with her Hyuga problems and her team Sashi was out of the question. Tamari was always with Shikamaru, so no. Sakura was working at the hospital as always. Ino was working at her flower shop and Tenten was always with Neji. Karin grumbled and sunk her head into the couch and let out an exhausted sigh. But suddenly, the door sprung wide open and in walked Naruto with a bright smile on his face. Karin was about to say something, but Naruto placed a finger on her lips and lifted her from the couch and put her on his back. "I'm not Naruto, but rather, I'm a clone," the Bunshin replied. "Naruto is in the park with a surprise for you. Come on." "Surprise? For me?" Karin's eyes were wide with surprise. Hell, the getting a surprise was enough surprise in itself for the redhead. "What the hell are you planning, Naruto-kun?" The clone charged from the room and jumped high into the sky, causing Karin's glasses to fly off of her face. In a moment of fear, she tightened her grip on the boy and held him as tightly as possible, in complete fear of a world that she couldn't see. Her arms tightened around the clone, making him laugh. He landed on the rooftop of a building and dashed off through over the passing civilians, making many of the older generation see small glimpses of Minato carrying Kushina through the skyline of Konoha. The flowing mane of beautiful red hair, being led by a head of golden locks, many people finally realized who Naruto's parents were. It wasn't that hard to tell, and in the world of shinobi, there's no such thing as coincidence. Karin kept her face buried deep into Naruto's back with her eyes shut tightly. But with a heavy thud, Karin realized that they had landed. The clone placed Karin down onto the ground. But instead of grass, she felt the softness of cloth. She opened her eyes, but quickly shut them, realizing that it wouldn't help her in any way whatsoever. Suddenly, there was a strange, but smooth feeling wrapped around her head. There was a soft click and there was now a weight on her face where her glasses would normally be. "Open your eyes, Karin." It was a soft, enchanting whisper that caused Karin's face to burn up. It was deep and soothing. It echoed through her bones and made her heart beat quicker. The bass reverberating through her body, causing her mind to get hazy. She was too afraid to open her eyes, but once she did, she felt her heart nearly stop. Above them was a cherry blossom tree. its pink petals flittering below as the soft winds of Hai no Kuni began to flow through. Off to the horizon, it was the same coloration as their first conversation at Mount Myoboku. The sky was painted in an amber glow with a bit of maroon dashed in. The sun itself was a blood red, almost as red as Karen's hair and eyes. But the colors. Oh, the colors. Never had she seen so many blend in together. But then, she realized that she was also no longer at ground level. She took a quick look around and realized that she and Naruto were at the top of the Hokage monument. She backed away and held onto Naruto's arm and nearly gawked when she felt how muscled his arms were. She mentally cursed herself for just now noticing all of his features. I see that you're enjoying the view. Naruto smiled. How could you tell? Karin replied with a sarcastic look. By the way, Karin, here. Look in the mirror. What YOKK? Karin was silent. She was wearing a pair of black-rimmed glasses made from the same metal of kunai, and to be frank, it looked and it made the crimson color of her eyes come out stronger and fiercer. But it was what was wrapped around her head. It was a wreath made of the most beautiful flowers that she'd ever seen in her entire life. They also seemed to be freshly picked and hand-woven together as one. She looked over to Naruto and felt tears stinging in her eyes. What? Naruto closed his eyes as a blush formed on his cheeks. I just thought that even though your personality is beautiful, why can't you look beautiful on the outside? What? Karin asked with wide eyes. For the longest time since we've met, you've always put down your red hair and always called it ugly. Naruto held her arms tightly and smiled the foxiest smile he could muster. I know I've said this before, but it's because of your red hair that I think you're beyond beautiful. Hell, let's be serious here, beyond gorgeous. Karin crashed her lips onto Naruto's and pushed him to the ground below. Tears were flowing down her cheeks as they continued. She kept her lips pressed against his, holding the embrace for as long as possible. The entire time, she felt the warning signs telling her to back off and release and let go and run away, but Karin willed herself to see it through to the end, to wait for Naruto to push her away. But then the blonde started kissing back. Suddenly the entire world ed into a small hole in the middle of space, revealing it to only be nothing more than a daydream. Naruto had a small blush on his cheeks with his hand behind his head. Naruto looked up and locked his blue eyes with Karin's crimson. What? Naruto smiled with a sheepish expression. I just thought that with your personality being beautiful on the inside, why can't you look beautiful on the outside as well? Not that I'm calling you ugly or anything. Karin tilted her head slightly. Naruto suddenly broke into an innate rambling with his fingers flittering and fritzing about with each one. Naruto suddenly ran a hand through his spiky blonde hair and gave Karin a nervous smile. Karin felt like giggling but deigned from doing so, wanting to see where this goes. She smirked as she realized that what she saw was a complete fantasy. But then Naruto suddenly shot from his seat and grabbed her two arms and stared at her. What? Karin's eyes were wide as she stared at Naruto. For the longest time, you reminded me of someone close to me. So much so, that you even went as far as insulting your wonderful red hair. Naruto suddenly sifted a hand through her unkempt side of red hair. To be frank, it pissed me off. Huh. Karin's eyebrow rose as she was about to hit him, but Naruto shushed her quite violently. The look on Naruto's face was so convincing, filled with so much love and caring. Even his chakra was sharing the sentiment. A small smirk grew on Naruto's face as he shut his eyes and looked down to the ground just for a bit before looking back up to Karin with fire burning in his eyes. I know I've told you this before, but I think it's because of your red hair that you're more than beautiful. Hell, let's be serious, more than gore. Karin tackled the blonde with a great smile spread across her face. Her lips pressed hard against Naruto's, taking the air from his lungs and causing his cheeks to explode in heat like a raging volcano. The poor blonde was completely surprised. His eyes were as wide as the expanse of the stars above crimson sky above him. His heart was exploding and beating faster than Guy and Lee when they train. He didn't know what to do, but he could feel her lips on his own, and to tell the truth, despite knowing how gay it was to compare his kiss with Karin and the one he had with Sasuke, he had to say he liked feminine lips a hell of a lot better. So without much thought into it, Naruto pushed back and started pressing his lips against her while she leaned her head in an angle to get a better experience. Naruto's tongue suddenly brushed against Karin's own lips. Karin knew exactly what to do and allowed Naruto's tongue entrance, and within moments, their tongues were battling for dominance as Naruto slowly leaned Karin into the ground. But as the battle commenced, the sun continued to set and the land became cooler and the breezes of the mountains to the east came in, but neither seemed to care or notice. Uzumaki. Karin smiled softly as they continued kissing. Uzumaki. Karin. What are you going to name your daughter? The man asked from behind his face mask. All around him were other nurses and doctors, it seemed. There were machines nearby with a soft, dull beep. The walls were obviously white, but there was a gray tint to the entire image. The doctor and the nurses were built up around one single bed in the center of the room. The woman in question was holding a bundle with a cute girl with a tuft of red hair adorning her head. The woman was beautiful with wondrous curves and a head of brunette hair. She had a small smile on her face, but she looked sickly and weak. She was drenched in sweat and sat in a bed without a man next to her or in the waiting room for her. Karin. The woman smiled as she cooed at the young child. Is there a surname? The surname of the father? The man asked. Uzumaki. The woman quickly replied, almost with pride beaming in her voice, but there was a small crack. Her father's last name is Uzumaki. Uzumaki Karin it is. Suddenly, the girl's eyes shot open and she pushed Naruto away from her as some seemingly forgotten memories shot through her hazy mind, completely ridding her of her previous feelings. Karin backed away as quickly as she could with near hyperventilation. She gripped her head as tightly as possible. Karin suddenly felt as if her world was crashing. She couldn't even make eye contact with Naruto. Karin, what's wrong? Naruto moved closer with a worried expression on his face. Did I do something wrong? No, Karin sighed out. It's not you, it's something that just came to my mind. What do you mean? It's almost as if someone hid this memory from me, Karin sighed. I am an Uzumaki. Naruto's eyes went wide and his jaw unhinged itself just as his chin smacked the ground. Naruto struggled to process the information but simply collapsed next to Karin and stared at the last bits of sunlight coming from the west, just before the red sun disappeared below the horizon. The two were silent as the awkwardness became palpable, almost gaining an actual physical form. Naruto felt his body shaking in the sudden realization that he had just made out with one of his family members despite not knowing how close they were or how distant. Karin was faring no different. Her heart was raging and her cheeks were roaring with heat. The redhead's skin was almost as red as her own head of hair. Her crimson eyes darted here and there, trying not to make eye contact with Naruto. I don't think it's that bad. I mean, Karin suddenly said, trying to salvage whatever was left. We might not even be that closely related. But we're still family. We share the same name and the same blood flows through our veins. We can't. Naruto sighed and started to back away from Karin. But the redhead grabbed his right arm as quickly as possible and pulled him towards her. Naruto looked at her with wide eyes, half expecting her to be disgusted, or just any disappointed look instead of the one that she currently had. It was almost as if she was hurt that he would say something like that, but come to think of it, Naruto finally realized that it sounded like he was trying to push her away. Wait. Karin held his arm tightly. Naruto-kun, I really like you though, and so what if we have the same last name? It happens all the time, right? Quote. Karin, but, hypothetically speaking, we do get together, then what? What do I do about Inoha, or Sakura, hell, Hinata too? Naruto asked. Not to mention that I still have to kill that bastard Sasuke and a damn war that I have to fight. Karin still held Naruto's arm and continued to stare at him, not once breaking her crimson gaze. Naruto suddenly realized that Karin was using chakra to hold him in place. Karin, though, had no idea. She continued to stare at the blonde idiot but then started seeing strange images as the chakra she was using started to build up in her head. Karin? Naruto asked with a worried expression. He looked definitely older with a broader face and stronger jawline. His hair though looked a lot like his father's. But one thing stayed the same and it was his beautiful cerulean eyes. Karin felt her heart skip a beat when Naruto smiled at her, especially with that cute confused look the Uzumaki had. What did you want to tell me? Naruto tilted his head slightly causing his bangs to flow down and around his face and neck. Karin didn't know how to respond to the blonde-haired boy. She turned and faced the newly built village whilst biting upon her fingernails. Karin stopped just at the edge with Naruto on his feet now ready to catch her should she fall off. I'm pregnant. Karin replied meekly. The world began to shrink and bend. Karin's crimson eyes widened, and she quickly released her grip on Naruto's arm, just before taking off through the darkness to get away from Naruto as fast as she could. Karin, wait. Naruto dashed after her and quickly caught up with the redhead. She was standing underneath a light post with a blank look on her face. Her wreath made of flowers still on her head and her metal-framed glasses were fit snugly on the bridge of her nose and around the ears. Her breathing was heavy and slow. She shut her eyes just as she sensed Naruto's chakra coming closer with each passing second. She turned and looked to see Naruto looking at her with a caring expression. Her heart was exploding at this point, but there was something bugging her. Where were these visions, if you can call them that, coming from? But Naruto suddenly grabbed her arms once more and began to lean in with a big smile on his face. Karin didn't know what to do but lean in as well. Their kiss was short and sweet with Karin losing her confusion and discomfort, but then there was a coming vision heading into her clouded mind, but she willed the thoughts from her mind. She stared off into Naruto's cerulean eyes and gave the blonde boy a small smile. Hey, Naruto-kun, remember that deal with me becoming a shinobi of Konoha? Karin asked. Why yeah, what about it? Naruto asked. Are you? Yup. Tell Tsunade-sama that I'm going to accept the offer. Karin smiled brightly to match Naruto's growing smirk. Naruto quickly grabbed the girl for a tight hug and held her tightly. Let's do this. A few days later, after spending some time traversing the raging sea of sand that consumed the land of wind, the Konoha delegation made it to Sunagaku. There were 18 teams that were vying for Chunin promotion with Naruto and Karin being the only duo with Kakashi as their sensei. Through the journey, Karin was bugged with date proposals and even some of the kunoichi trying to get a peek at what's underneath Karin's clothes. Naruto though, through the 3 days of traveling, was training on gathering senjutsu chakra while he moved, knowing for a fact that using senjutsu would be a great factor of victory in the coming war. Not only that, but he was teaching Karin about her newfound ability with the mind's eye of the Kagura. Apparently, because of her Uzumaki blood, the Kagura Shingen was expanded and soon enough, it was able to see more than just chakra signatures. By reading the chakra and the emotions being portrayed and the fluctuations of the chakra, she was able to start seeing visions of the future, whether just a few minutes or even a few years. Because she needed to read chakra, she could even read your past and see into it by following the chakra residue that every shinobi and kunoichi leaves behind, unknowingly of course. All of this was unlocked by the realization of her true potential as an Uzumaki with special chakra. With their abilities aside, Naruto and Karin and Ino had a confusing relationship of sorts, if you could even call it that. Karin wanted Naruto and Ino wanted Naruto, but Naruto didn't know who to choose since he really liked the both of them, but Sakura was still in the picture as was Hinata, though Hinata chose to be on the sidelines and watch the other competitors for Naruto's heart battle it out. Sakura though, had no idea that Ino had been dating Naruto or that Karin was too, sort of. The blonde had it good in eyes of many shinobi of Konoha. They were jealous of his chick magnet status and wanted to become almost exactly like him. Naruto, once he found out that boys and kids were trying to emulate him, he simply shook his head and tried to force the thoughts from his head and enjoy his life as a hero without the hero worship. But back to Sunagaker, the Chunin exams were in and it was projected to have the most promotions than any other Chunin exam in history. Naruto smirked to himself and felt a small explosion of excitement grow within his chest, the thought of finally rising through the ranks and become one with his friends in the Konoha 11. Not only that, but they could become the Konoha 12 once again with Karin, should she be accepted by the rest of their age group and comrades in the Shinobi Corps. The two were nervous to say the least. With almost no knowledge about the Chunin exams of Sunagaker, they felt that they were going in blind, unlike their first time taking the Chunin exams. All around them were genin from all different nations competing, most likely to help bolster the allied shinobi force and its numbers. Naruto smirked to himself and shut his eyes as he walked, and slowly but surely, Senjutsu chakra began to flow into his body. Even though it didn't last long, he was able to get at least 1 minute of Senjutsu chakra into his body before it started ruining his eyesight. He wiped sweat off of his brow and continued to follow his team. Naruto smiled at the people of Suna, as they called out to the man who saved their cage. Karin took notice of this and got even closer to Naruto, interlacing her fingers with his, when she found a large group of Suna shinobi giggling with bright blushes spread across their faces. Now what did you do to receive such recognition? Karin whispered. Nothing much, Naruto laughed. I saved the cage from the Akatsuki sometime at the beginning of this year. It's no biggie. Why you took on the Akatsuki to save their leader? Karin asked. Sasori and Deidara. I don't know who that is. Naruto said with a blank look. You fought them, but didn't know who they were. Karin deadpanned. Well anyway, Sasori was the red-headed one and Deidara was the blonde one with the hands in his mouth. The clay guy. Oh, him. Naruto glared off into the ground. I was close to killing him that day. What happened? Karin asked. I pounded him into the ground. Naruto sighed. I was so close to shoving a Rasengan into his gut, but his body melted into a clay body. What happened afterwards? Karin added. What makes you think there's an afterwards? Naruto gave her an estranged look. There's always an afterwards. Fine. Naruto sighed. The Kyuubi within me took advantage of my hatred and anger and I ended up going into a two-tailed Biju cloak and I nearly killed my own sensei that day were it not for the seal that my former master, Jiraiya, had given him. Damn, Karin sighed. Let's just hope nothing like that happens again, K. Don't worry about it, Karin. Naruto smirked. Naruto smirked and continued on his walk with his girlfriend in hand and headed towards the nearest Suna shinobi that he knew on a personal level. But there was someone he was not expecting to show up in the village. Shikamaru. Naruto's eyes were wide. Naruto, Shikamaru sighed. What is it that you want? What are you doing here? Naruto asked, still feeling weird about the fact that Shika of all people made it to the village before him. I thought that you'd be back home in Konoha. I invited him here, Naruto. Another voice said from behind. Gaara. Naruto smiled. And the other two. Hello Tamari and makeup guy. I have a name, you know. Kankuro spat. Yeah. Naruto smiled and grabbed Gaara in for a tight hug. Naruto. Go to the academy with your team. There will be Junin waiting there to get you processed into the exams. Gaara then turned and left the street before any of the civilians could notice that their leader was standing amongst them. Naruto shrugged and grabbed Karin and began to jog down the street towards the academy, at least where he thought it was. All the while, Karin was blushing wildly as civilians and other shinobi stared at them with smiles and giggles. Karin had never felt like this before, so appreciated. Naruto turned his head to her and continued to smile, and stopped just as they came up to a large building made from sandstone and rock. There was a massive congregation of shinobi from all over the shinobi nations, with shinobi from Iwa and Kumo being among the most numerous. They looked at Naruto and some even felt a little repulsed by the Konoha shinobi, but Naruto paid no heed to their looks, almost as if he was once again back to his oblivious self that he always is. Whilst Naruto made no action to signify that he noticed their looks, Karin sure did. And to be frank, it pissed her off just a tad bit. She didn't know what the deal was with these snot-nosed genin, despite them being about their age as well. She looked to see Naruto still smiling that goofy foxy smile and walking past the people with his fingers still interlaced with hers. Karin felt that the stares were too much and pulled Naruto towards her as quickly as possible and held him close to her. "What are you doing looking like a careless idiot?" Karin asked. "I don't know what you're talking about, Karin-chan." Naruto smiled. "I'm just being me, you know. I can barely hold in my excitement for the retake of the Chunin exams." "Why are you so full of energy?" Karin laughed. "Just work harder on it, baka. I'll try my best." Soon enough, the line shortened and Naruto and Karin were now at the front of the line signing papers and waivers ahead of time so Suna wouldn't get blamed for any of the hurt or potentially killed genin of the different nations. Naruto looked at the paper for a moment and got beads of sweat pouring down his head when he realized that some of the words used for certain parts of the waiver used words that were beyond his vocabulary. So with an embarrassed sigh, he asked Karin for help, gaining some giggles from behind and other lines next to the two Konoha shinobi. Some of the Suna Junin themselves stifled their laughter but held it in better than the genin around them. Karin growled under her breath when she paid attention to what the people around her were saying behind their backs. Once Naruto and Karin finished, the redhead this time took the lead and grabbed Naruto towards the door of the academy. But within a few seconds, they were stopped by a Junin. The Junin shook his head and pointed at a sign hanging on the door they were heading for. "Exit only." Karin felt her body turn cold with embarrassment and soon enough, many of the less mature genin burst into laughter. Karin gritted her teeth and clenched her fists, digging her fingernails into Naruto's hand. The blonde fell to his knees and tried to break his hand free from her vice-like death grip, to no avail. Her chakra darkened and her glasses became drowned out in lens flare from the sun above. She released Naruto from her grip and began to walk through the crowd with Naruto following behind towards the door that said entrance. Naruto jogged up to her and wrapped his arm around her waist and led her within the building, trying his hardest to keep her from lashing out on anyone. Karin was grumbling to herself, making Naruto realize that she was having one of those moments. "Come on, Karin. I think it would be in our best interests if you calmed down just a bit." Naruto whispered quietly, almost like he was pleading. "Do I look like I need to calm down?" Karin asked in an eerily calm voice. "Look at me, do I need to, Naruto-kun?" Now Naruto was nervous. He didn't like the sound of that voice, nor the smile that she was putting on. He shivered involuntarily and started backing away, waving his hands in a defensive manner. Karin, though, relented her gaze and looked onward to continue walking towards the testing hall. She closed her eyes and followed the source of the chakra signatures. She sighed and looked back to see Naruto with his hands in his pockets with his eyes staring at her back. Karin tilted her head, but then realized that something was up with Naruto. He was blushing and his eyes, when the two made eye contact, darted away from her and his face blushed harder. She could sense his sudden discomfort and he slowed his walking pace while the speed of his heart and emotions were going the speed of light. What the hell is he looking at? Karin followed his eyes and noticed something. His eyes were fixated on her red hair. Well then, Karin blushed a little harder and turned her head around and started to smile softly. She could sense his happiness, but shook it from her thoughts and continued to follow the trail of chakra signatures leading into a room filled with shinobi and kunoichi. After a few rights and lefts and even a few complete rotations of the entire floor, Karin and Naruto made it to the first room and they were surprised with the amount. Naruto surmised that there were at least 2 times as many participants than the Chunin exams a few years prior. Naruto felt his heart beat heavier but eased when he saw the Konohamaru Corps laughing with some genin squad from Suna that was about the same age as Konohamaru. So what's the plan, oh great hero of the leaf? Karin asked. Don't ask me. I failed the Chunin exams that first time. Naruto sighed. I don't know what to do. To tell you the truth, I didn't even know what I was doing the first time. I damn well don't know what I'm doing right now. You're impossible. Karin laughed. I just hope that our proctor is just as easy as the one in Konoha. Easy? Naruto asked incredulously. I was about to piss myself that day. If I remember correctly, you were the one that got everyone to keep their wits. Karin smiled. Well, I thought it was cool. Naruto huffed. All right everyone. The first stage of the Chunin exams will begin momentarily. A voice came from the front of the class. Thank Kami that there isn't anything wrong so far with this Chunin exam. Naruto and Karin shuffled past the other genin and pulled out seats next to each other and picked up their pencils, ready for the test, expecting it to be exactly like the one they took in Konoha a few years ago. Because of the war, we are changing the first stage of the Chunin exams. The Junin said from her pedestal. Your new assignment is to come up with a 3-month battle plan, which should state a detailed 3-month battle plan with a timeline. Logical arrangements, supply lines, strategies, missions, squad size, food distribution, everything that a company or a platoon would need to be efficient on the battlefield within an hour. There were a few groans going throughout the classroom. But Naruto, though, had never been as happy as before this moment. He smiled brightly and picked up his pencil and went straight to work once the bell rang to begin. While other testers were struggling to come up with a detailed 3-month plan, Naruto was furiously writing down the strategies and plans for the battle force. With 5-man squads as the standard, with 4 assault shinobi and 1 medical shinobi, it was a genius plan. Karin, though, was struggling to keep her eyes from prying onto Naruto's papers and those around her. While she was a genius with chemicals and poisons and other such things, she was nowhere near a battle specialist. She was a censor and a medical ninja. Nothing more, nothing less. She scribbled as much as she can and tried to keep up with her more ecstatic teammate. Naruto, despite not being anywhere near Shikamaru's level, he was still a mastermind in his own right and in the right situations such as this. He continued to write as other testers were going crazy with their brains and some even went so far as to fall asleep and others even chose to leave the classroom to call it quits. Naruto didn't see what the problem was, but then quickly realized that this was just a bunch of genin in this room trying to come up with strategies on the fly. Naruto grew a smirk but continued to write, finishing up the 2nd month of his plan and moving on to the more important parts of his battle plan that required more important game pieces. Jinchuriki and the last remaining ones at that. Naruto didn't know whether or not there was another Jinchuriki still alive, but if there was, theoretically speaking, Naruto's 3rd month would go off without a hitch, and the Jinchuriki tag team or even squad would annihilate the Akatsuki after they've been wounded by a significantly powerful force. The blonde looked over to his side to see Karin still only on the 1st week of her 2nd month with barely anything for her 1st month. He made a quick look around, fast enough to where the proctors couldn't see, and noticed that many of his classmates were barely entering month 2. The boy sighed and finished up his masterpiece of a strategy and placed his pencil down and began to take a nap. 45 minutes later, Karin violently elbowed the blonde from his slumber. Naruto rubbed his groggy eyes and smiled when he realized that at least a quarter of the competition was gone. Karin smirked softly at him and ran a hand through her unkempt half of hair and pushed her glasses up her face. She huffed slightly and stuck her tongue out at him. Naruto shot from the table and looked around fully awake and aware of his surroundings. People were staring at him and some were even snickering. Naruto looked to Karin but she chose to huff and turn away. The proctor looked at him and took his papers and walked to the front of the class. Naruto looked up to the clock behind the proctor and realized that he'd been asleep longer than he'd anticipated. Nearly 5 minutes after the test was supposed to end. Now that we've heard enough about eating ramen off of redheads, we can now move on. The proctor said without a giggle, but the corners of her lips ticked up and down when she saw Naruto's expression. Oh shit. Tell me about it, Baka. Naruto smirked as he and Karin walked from the academy with beaming smiles spread across their faces. Karin was saying something important, but Naruto paid no attention to the woman. Karin didn't realize and continued to talk, occasionally asking Naruto something and the blonde would say something in response, causing Karin to continue on with their conversation. But Naruto was suddenly smashed against the head by Karin's fist. Naruto turned around and froze in his tracks when he found that Karin looked ready to kill him with her anger. He started backing away, but slipped on a rock and ended up crashing into the sandy ground below. Karin glared at him with her glasses covering her eyes because of the lens flare. You baka, Karin roared. You weren't even listening to me, were you? I was. Don't worry about it, Karin ch. Then what did I ask you and what did you say in return? Karin asked as her fist clenched even tighter. I don't know. Naruto was suddenly blown back by an amazing blast of chakra coming from the irate redhead. I asked if you'd like to bang Tamari and you answered yes. Karin shouted. Then I asked if you'd like to another guys and you answered yes. What? Naruto turned red from embarrassment. Are you sure I answered yes? Oh, shut up. Karin growled. I hate you so much. Karin crossed her arms over her chest and walked ahead of the Uzumaki. Naruto laughed softly and rubbed the back of his head and took off for his woman. Naruto wrapped his arm around her waist, but the woman quickly elbowed him in his gut, causing him to hunch over and hurl on the ground below. People groaned in pain when the elbow made contact, while others shot from their seats to help the hero of Konoha. Naruto was helped from the dirt path and patted down by kunoichi from the different villages. Karin saw this and stomped right back to her blonde man and slapped him upside his head and dragged him away from the mob of kunoichi. Most of which were quite beautiful. Naruto was sweating bullets more than what he should, but he didn't say a thing, knowing that if the wrong thing was said, he would receive another, well-deserved punch across the face. Soon enough, they reached the destination of the second stage of the Chunin exams. In front of them was a great gate with massive walls to match its size. The flags of Sunagakur were draped over the side, waving in the warm desert wind. But beyond the wall and even over the top, small wisps of sand and sand clouds were seen waving around. If one were to put their ear against the gate, they could hear rushing and crashing sand and other non-desirable creatures going about through the sand dunes. Karin sensed a mass multitude of creatures ranging from large to gigantic. His skin went cold when she sensed desert spiders of massive size and even desert scorpions. She shivered greatly, getting Naruto's attention. The boy quickly looked her way and wrapped his arm around her protectively. What's wrong? Naruto asked softly. There are scorpions, spiders, desert snakes, the whole shebang. Tamari laughed. This is the second stage of the Chunin exams. I am Sabaku no Tamari, and I am the proctor for this exam. A few genin shivered slightly at the mention of such insects and creatures living behind the walls. Naruto felt his own skin turn cold and even felt his bowels want to release from the mere thought of scorpions. But then again, he knew that they wouldn't be a challenge for his awesomeness. So here is your mission. Survive and fight your way through 100 miles of desert, infested with animals and insects that have evolved to kill shinobi and kunoichi alike, to deliver 4 scrolls to checkpoints dotted around the area. The checkpoints are in 25-mile intervals. Surprise! Surprise, you only get 1 scroll each team, so figure out how to get the rest. It really shouldn't be that hard to figure out. By the way, a small hint, killing is allowed. If it weren't for the raging sands behind Tamari, one could hear a pin drop a mile away. The air turned cold all of a sudden and teams looked at one another nervously and with wary eyes. Each team examining each other, looking for the weakest teams to pick off first. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the teams from Iwa and Kumo, while Karin started sensing people's chakra signatures and their emotions, trying to get a good idea of the weakest teams that made it to the second stage. Get to your gates, Tamari shouted. You have 3 days to make it to the final checkpoint. Get ready. Naruto and Karin sped off to their gate and stood steady. Naruto already gathering senjutsu chakra into his body. Karin shut her eyes and channeled a small, untraceable amount of chakra to work as sonar. Within a second, she was able to pinpoint 5 teams in their immediate vicinity. 3 of which were weaklings from Kiri. Begin. Without a second thought, all teams shot forward into the walled desert. Karin ran ahead of Naruto and jumped into the air. Naruto ran ahead and Karin landed on his back with her hands in a tiger hand seal. Naruto continued running and now, he was in sage mode. He was able to sense already, 10 teams have been defeated by animals, and 2 have already fallen prey to an Iwa team. Naruto, to your right, Karin shouted. Suddenly, a barrage of kunai and shuriken shot towards the blonde Uzumaki. With a quick movement of his wrist, he drew out a kunai and blocked a great deal of the projectiles and narrowed his eyes at his assailant. They were 2 Kumo teams with the same thought of defeating the hero of Konoha, not that they even knew who he was. The first charged for Naruto without checking his surroundings, but Karin jumped in and kicked the shinobi in his gut, before bashing her elbow into the shinobi's back. She kicked off of his fallen body and with an even quicker motion, she managed to even swipe their scroll in the confrontation. She smirked a little and ran away before jumping onto Naruto's back. The Kumo shinobi charged after the 2 Uzumaki, but they were stopped when an Udama Rasengan smashed into the desert surface, throwing up sand and dirt, covering Naruto's and Karin's escape. Once the dirt cloud dissipated, all that was left though were 2 clones of Naruto. They smirked before dispelling. A few yards away, Naruto was running full speed with now 2 scrolls in his possession. He smirked and jumped up using senjutsu to increase the strength in his jump. Around the 2 shinobi, they looked down to see giant creatures jumping from the sand and taking out entire teams with single swipes. When they landed right in the path of a rising scorpion. Its black exoskeleton made Naruto's skin freeze in fear, but Karin wasn't faring any better. Naruto though, quickly snapped from his stupor and charged forward with a Rasengan in his palm. The scorpion snarled at the Uzumaki. Naruto shook his head and slammed the Rasengan into the scorpion, shooting it a good 20 feet, just before it dug its stinger into the sandy surface and spun it back around. It landed all 8 of its feet onto the sand just before it charged at the Uzumaki. It's coming. Karin howled. I know that. 3 Naruto clones popped into existence and the 3 clones started forming a Rasenshuriken. The scorpion closed the distance too fast, and dispelled the 3 clones with a single swipe of its stinger. Naruto jumped back and tightened his hold on Karin as he struggled to keep free from the range of the apparent extending stinger. We have to get around this thing. Naruto shouted over the clicking and crackling of the insect. The scorpion shot its stinger down towards the Uzumaki, but Naruto jumped away and formed another 3 clones that grabbed the stinger and lifted the scorpion from the ground and slammed it into the sand using the amazing strength that senjutsu provides. The clones jumped onto the underbelly of the scorpion and used the frog slap, bashing the thin, unprotected underbelly of the beast, repeatedly. But as they continued, one of the clones put too much chakra into the attack and burst the scorpion in all directions, spraying the sands with its insides and entrails. But from the blood and flesh, spraying from the now empty husk of a scorpion, a team of partially digested shinobi from Kiri, flowed out with 3 scrolls clutched tightly in their hands. Naruto looked up to the sky and let out a quick whistle. He smirked. There must really be a kami. Whatever. Just get the scrolls. Karin jumped off of Naruto's back and sifted through the bodies and grabbed the scrolls. She wiped them clean of stomach juice and read that the 3 scrolls had numbers on them, 1 to 3 in consecutive order. She looked to Naruto and asked for the scroll. It seems that we have two number 1 scrolls. Let's keep them both. We can use them as a bargaining chip with other teams that have the scroll we need. Naruto quickly said with a smirk. If they don't have the scroll we need, we could always farm for more and beat them down. Oh Naruto, you're getting pretty violent. Karin smiled and climbed back onto Naruto's back. I can sense the first checkpoint to the northeast. Got it. Naruto charged through the sands, kicking up a massive cloud right behind them. He smirked at how easy this Chunin exam was. Already he was able to piece together the meaning of the tests. While the first was quite obvious, he was now able to see what the second test would bring out. It was a trial to see what shinobi would be willing to make it in the Messenger Corps. He remembered reading about them with Karin one day, and found that it was probably the second most dangerous position to be in, other than a vanguard shinobi. If one could survive running through a desert and deliver the correct scrolls to the correct checkpoint, then they were good enough to continue on through to the final stage. They were good enough to be in the Messenger Corps. The two continued on their journey towards the checkpoint without much interaction with the other teams, which went well into the 100. But with the first checkpoint closing in with just a few hundred yards to go, a massive heat wave shot down upon them, slowing the Uzumaki down. Naruto made a quick jump from the ground and soon enough, an Iwa Genin shot from the ground. Or at least, he thought it was a Genin. The rest of her team shot from the ground as well and released a barrage of earth jutsu and fire techniques. All of which Naruto dodged thanks to Karin and her sensing ability. Watch out! A clone is coming from underneath us. Karin called out. Suddenly, a clone of the kunoichi of the team shot from the ground, and she barely missed Naruto's chin. The clone spun in midair and hurled kunai at Naruto and Karin as she spun. Naruto jumped back and dropped Karin and drew out his own kunai and started deflecting the attacks. But because of this, he wasn't thinking and ended up leaving Karin unattended for. Once the kunoichi from Iwa stopped her spinning, she sped through a quick hand seal pattern and shot out a massive stream of water and blew Naruto back with a force equal to getting kicked in the chest by a raging horse. Naruto struggled to get back to his feet. Soon enough, the same kunoichi was flying through the air with her fist exploding with chakra. Oh! Naruto quickly rolled over and hurled a few shuriken and kunai in a failed attempt to stop her, but her chakra deflected the attacks. The girl slammed into the sand, launching a massive storm of sand and dirt in all directions, and even managed to blow Naruto away even further. He struggled to push through the sand, but in the end, the sand was blown away by the winds of the desert. Karin! Naruto cried out. Where are you? Naruto dashed through the sands and crawled through the dunes wondering where the girl was. It didn't take long, but Karin was lying on the ground with a massive gash across her abdomen. Karin was slowly healing herself, but the Iwa shinobi were in front of her with their weapons drawn. The 4 scrolls were askew behind Karin. They seem to have the same scrolls that we do. The lead kunoichi sighed. I guess we should keep them. What do we do with the girl? One of her teammates asked. Do what you want. Naruto shot through the sand and lodged his foot into the larger of the 3, forcing the boy into the sand. The blonde quickly spun around and dug his fist into the chin of the other, knocking that boy from his sandals. Naruto looked to Karin with his eyes blood red in the first stage of the Jinchuriki cloak. His whiskers were darkened and more defined and his body was healed of any and all wounds. But the 2 genin he had just disposed of, were actually clones. The real shinobi came up from the sand and grabbed Naruto's ankles and pulled him into the sand. The shinobi then rose from the ground and smirked with their team leader. The Iwa shinobi were about to continue what they were doing, until Naruto spoke up. What is your name? Naruto asked. His eyes were shut to the world. Naruto's whiskers reverted back to normal, but something strange was happening with his eyelids. Kuretsuchi. Well, Kuretsuchi, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Sage of Konoha. Naruto raised his arms, blowing back almost 1,000 pounds of sand, and forcing himself from the sand. Kuretsuchi's eyes shot wide open as she and her team were blasted away from the two Uzumaki. Before Karin and the scrolls could get swallowed by the sand, Naruto jumped back and grabbed the girl and the scrolls with a quick movement. A clone popped next to them and hurled Naruto into the sky and out of the pit hole. They spun through the air as Naruto grabbed Karin closer to him. He took the now floating scrolls and quickly slid them into Karin's shirt without her noticing. He knew it was a bit dirty, but if it was to mean their survival, he was going to do whatever it took. They spun once more as they tilted towards the ground, and Naruto pushed her away and grabbed her once more, wrapping her arms and legs around him, just before he hit the ground below. The impact threw up a perfect cover of sand and dirt. Karin was starting to breathe hard as the wound continued to bleed. Naruto didn't even need to look back. He simply charged off through the sand cloud and into the desert around them. He jumped into the stones protruding from the sand and started skipping along, all the while feeling Karin's breath get heavier. It seems that Karin was having trouble healing her wound. Naruto wanted to set her down, but he knew that those Iwa shinobi were probably on his tail. Of course though, like almost always, Naruto jinxed himself the moment the thought was made. The three Iwa shinobi pushed themselves from the sand and immediately followed after the Uzumaki. Naruto felt his body run cold when he realized that he'd basically run into a path for them to take him and his girlfriend, kill them, and take their scrolls. Kuretsuchi sped through a quick hand seal pattern and shouted out a jutsu that Naruto deigned from hearing, and soon enough, a barrage of quicklime bullets shot forward, grazing a couple hairs off of Naruto's head. He spun around and formed three clones to deal with the Iwa shinobi. The three clones shot off towards Kuretsuchi and her teammates. The lead clone jumped and kicked for Kuretsuchi, but she quickly caught the attack and hurled him to her right, causing him to bump into another clone, dispelling the two of them, leaving the final clone to Akatsuchi. Kuretsuchi nodded her head and took off with her other teammate and gave chase to the retreating Uzumaki from Konoha. The black-haired girl shook her head and nodded at her teammate. The boy sped through a quick hand seal pattern and shot forward a steady stream of fire, which quickly exploded into a massive dragon that sped forward on a warpath to incinerate Naruto and Karin. Naruto, Karin whispered. My wound, it's festering, all of this sand and dirt. Don't speak, Karin, Naruto said back with a frown on his face. It'll only make things worse. I'll get us to the checkpoint, and there might be help. Oi, Kyuubi, Naruto suddenly said. What do you want, Gaki? The Kyuubi replied. As you can most likely see, I'm taking a nice nap. Give Karin some of your chakra. Naruto stated. She needs it to stay conscious. Now why would I give chakra to another Uzumaki? The Kyuubi taunted. Damn you, Kyuubi, Naruto shouted. Fine, if not for me, then do it for you. How does saving her help me? The nine-tailed fox fought hard not to laugh at the notion. Without her, I'll most likely die here, and if I die, so do you, Naruto replied with a stern voice. The Kyuubi was about to start laughing, but he quickly resigned the thought, knowing that the boy was right. With a begrudging sigh, the Kyuubi let out a smirk. You humans are annoying. The Kyuubi laid his head back down onto his paws and shut his eyes for just a moment. Naruto was about to say something, but the Kyuubi's chakra shot from the cage and entered Naruto's body, but just as it entered, it disappeared, almost as if it was being funneled off somewhere else. The Kyuubi smirked once more. Get out of here and let me sleep, Gaki. Back in the real world, Naruto came to reality and turned to see Karin's eyes a darker crimson than before and with a slitted pupil in the center of her irides. Her fingernails were extended and small whisker marks were formed on her cheeks. She looked to Naruto with a surprised look on her face, but didn't say anything. Instead, she channeled chakra and her wounds healed immediately, and her range of sensing was increased tenfold. Naruto, keep running. The checkpoint is just 50 yards away. We're very close. Karin shouted out while grabbing some kunai and hurling them back at the Iowa shinobi chasing after them. I'll hold them off alright. Let's go. Naruto channeled chakra to his legs and took off running, trying his hardest to make it to the checkpoint. From what he was able to discern from the vicious attacks that the Iowa team was giving them, the checkpoints are safe zones. Naruto, jump! Karin suddenly screamed. Jump now! Naruto didn't question her and jumped as high as he could. As he jumped though, he could feel his senjutsu chakra leaving his body once more. He looked down to see the largest snake he'd ever seen in his life. Easily twice as large as the purple snake that Orochimaru used all those years ago. It was covered in sand and its body was obviously shedding. The three Iowa shinobi down below froze in their tracks, but unlike what Naruto knew that most of his friends would do, the Iowa shinobi jumped back and started hurling ninjutsu and weapons at the snake in quick succession. It didn't take long, but they quickly realized that long range wasn't going to cut it. Kuretsuchi charged forward with chakra building up in her fist and smashed it into the snake's face, forcing at least a fourth of it back into the sand. She landed on the ground and sped through another pattern of hand seals. Yuten. Sekigyo no Jutsu. Kuretsuchi spit a massive blast of quicklime, quickly mixing into the face of the snake, forming a mold around it. She went through another, just as quick, hand seal pattern, and shot another blast of water, much like the one she used to blow Naruto back, not too long ago. The combination of the two jutsu brought the snake curling down to the ground, but it did not stop the snake. Kuretsuchi landed on the ground with fear crawling up and down her spine. She sped through another quick hand seal pattern. She took a deep breath and spit forward a ball of fire that was equal to Sasuke's use. The snake didn't falter though, in fact, it was practically unscathed. The quicklime started crumbling and falling off of the snake's face. Naruto and Karin landed just a few feet away from the backside of the snake. Naruto looked to Karin and was wondering if he should help them. Karin, even though the thought wasn't said out loud, she knew what Naruto was about to do. But before she could hold him back, Naruto was already halfway up the snake's spine and nearing the top of its head. God damn him. Karin let out an exasperated sigh. Naruto, be careful. From what I can tell, its scales are strengthened with chakra. And lots of it. Naruto grunted when he heard what she had just said. For years he's been punching through things, blasting through things in Rasengan-ing through things that have been strengthened with chakra. First Haku's mirrors, then the sand armor of Gaara, then Gaara himself, then on and on. Naruto smirked and knew deep down inside that this snake was going to be of no problem. He jumped onto its head and raised his hand with a Rasengan spiraling violently. He let out a loud battle cry and slammed the attack into the snake's bare and unprotected head, forcing the beast into the ground, faster than the speed of light. Naruto landed next to Kuretsuchi and drew out a kunai whilst drawing onto Senjutsu chakra. Kuretsuchi was quite terrified of Naruto's power. Soon enough, Karin dropped next to them and placed her hands on Kuretsuchi's shoulder and began to heal her wounds. Hold still, Karin replied. Naruto, what did you do? It looks like nothing changed. I had a quick theory about those chakra-enhanced scales. Naruto said, if I were to dispel my Rasengan at the moment of impact, instead of drilling it into the scales, which would most likely deflect the attack, the chakra from the Rasengan would lose the gravity holding it together and spiral off in different directions, causing the chakra within each individual scale within the spread radius to fluctuate, weakening the flow of chakra to the protective shield of the snake's cranium. So in other words, Karin started smirking. I've given it the headache of a lifetime. Naruto smiled. Kuretsuchi-san, do you think you can help me bust this snake's skull right open? Gladly. Kuretsuchi jumped forward just as Naruto did. The snake saw this though and lunged forward with its head and dug into the ground below, kicking up sand and injuring Akatsuchi and almost killing their other teammate. Naruto and Kuretsuchi landed on the back of the snake's neck and charged up with their best attacks, blaring wildling in their hands. With Kuretsuchi having a fist made from earth and Naruto having two clones behind him helping him make his Rasenshuriken. The two jumped up into the air and first went Kuretsuchi with her slamming the rock fist of hers into the snake's dented cranium, causing the scales to shoot off, cracking a great deal of the skull itself, revealing the targeted area. Naruto's clones popped away, leaving him in the air as he got ready to hurl his Rasenshuriken into the brain of the blasted snake. Fuuton. Rasen's Hurricane. Naruto bent forward and hurled the monstrosity of a jutsu forward just as Kuretsuchi made a jump off of the doomed snake's head. The Rasenshuriken sliced through the air and dug deeply into the opened head of the snake, slicing, tearing and mauling the beast. Naruto narrowed his eyes and soon enough, the Rasenshuriken exploded, engulfing the entire head of the snake, tearing it apart and lodging small chakra spikes into its face, skull and any other part connected to its head. Naruto landed not too far away and popped his neck before walking up to the group of fellow shinobi. Karin was struggling to keep Akatsuchi's bleeding at a minimum. She pumped as much of her chakra as she could, and she was still in the cubified state. She narrowed her eyes and started channeling in the Kyuubi's chakra, strengthening her skills and her powers. Within moments though, Akatsuchi's bleeding stopped, but the damage to his body was still on the inside. It's poison, Karin stated after running her hand over Akatsuchi's body. I don't know how to stop it without the correct antidote. Karin, Naruto said suddenly. You know what you have to do. Remember what you've told me about your powers. But you said, I'm saying do it now. We have to help him. Naruto said with a calm look. Understood Naruto-kun. Karin rolled up her sleeve and held out her arm. Bite my arm. What are you minions doing? Kuretsuchi growled. What? Be quiet and watch. Naruto quickly said. Akatsuchi struggled, but was able to sink his teeth into Karin's arm. The redhead grunted in pain, but let out a quiet sigh instead. Kuretsuchi though was appalled, but upon closer inspection, chakra was being funneled from Karin and into Akatsuchi. It didn't take long, but the effects were immediate. Akatsuchi's once pale and sickly-looking body was healed, and after doing a quick diagnostic over Akatsuchi, Karin confirmed that the poison was no more. How? Kuretsuchi's eyes were wide with fright. Who are you two? That is of no concern right now. Naruto grabbed Karin and hoisted her onto his back right before taking off in the direction Karin pointed. Karin smiled softly and rested her chin on Naruto's shoulder and let her hair run free in the desert wind. Naruto was strong and held her tightly against his back, making sure that she would fall off. The day was already at midday, and he wasn't looking forward to having to have a schedule of 1 checkpoint per day, with 4 for 3. He shook his head and continued to run, taking orders from the girl he was carrying. She wasn't heavy nor was she a feather, but Naruto was thinking about complaining to the girl about why he has to carry her. Then again, if he did ask, Karin would probably smack him against his head or call him lazy, or something to some other effect of endearing insults. Karin tightened her hold on him and felt a big smile grow on her face. The longer she stayed with Naruto, the more distinguished his chakra became to her. So far, she was able to capture and memorize 10 different moods from the boy, just by reading his chakra. As of now, it was gray-green, meaning, he was thinking hard and was bound to say something insulting to someone. Since she was the only person there, she knew that he was going to complain about him carrying her. She did try and tell him that she could run on her own. Damned blonde trying to be chivalrous. Karin struggled to keep her giggles in. She looked up though when she sensed the checkpoint nearby, just a few feet away from where they were currently. Naruto, we're here, Karin said. Where? Naruto asked. There's nothing here, wait. Genjutsu. Karin said. Wait. Naruto, don't dispel. We don't want brainless teams to be after us now, do we? I would like to. Naruto cheekily replied. No one cares what you want. Karin retorted with a laugh. Troublesome woman. TCH. Just go already. 1 down, 3 to go. Naruto smiled at the redhead as she took a quick swig of water from her large water bottle. He ran a hand through his blonde spiky hair and sniffed the air for a moment. The doors of the checkpoint swung open, revealing a disheveled and quite messy-looking Iowa team. Kuretsuchi glared at the boy, but Akatsuchi tried to calm the girl down. Good to see you have made it. Naruto smiled. Sure. Kuretsuchi grumbled before tossing her scroll to the shinobi behind the counter. Would you like some water? The Junin asked. Huh? Kuretsuchi looked confused. Why does this place look like a pit stop? Because it is Kuretsuchi-san. The Junin sighed. During missions, even though messengers go for long distances and even through combat, they still need rest. These checkpoints are designed to simulate that. What if a team wants to sleep and rest? Kuretsuchi asked while massaging her aching shoulder. They have every right to do so, but like in real battle, if the messenger sleeps for too long, or too little, it can be a hindrance to the mission and ruin the timeframe designed for whatever strategy or contingency is in place. The girl nodded her head when a Chunin walked in with water bottles. I needed that, Kuretsuchi sighed as she chugged her water. It was rough out there, Naruto. Indeed, Kuretsuchi. The blonde laughed. That snake sure did pose a challenge. Not for you. The Iowa Kunoichi replied, sounding a bit annoyed. Nah, it was still a challenge. Naruto said. That snake could have killed all of us if I wasn't careful in how I attacked it. Good thing you're not as stupid as most make you out to be, Naruto-kun. Karin secretly slurred the honorific while giving Kuretsuchi a glare. Neither Naruto, nor Kuretsuchi's teammates caught the look or the slur, but Kuretsuchi sure did. The Kunoichi glared at the redhead and clenched her fists, causing the leather of her gloves to rub. It seems that the red-headed whore has the hots for the hero of Konoha. Kuretsuchi glared. It seems that this blondie is perfect for promotion, the redhead though, I don't know. She sure is a great healer and she has a strange keke genkai. Wait, now that I think of it. She's strong, too strong to be a genin. Karin narrowed her eyes at Kuretsuchi. I can sense her chakra, but something feels so familiar about it, almost as if I've sensed it before. But her chakra wasn't what I was intending to sense. I know it. Yes, I remember now. Holy, I know her. She was at the cage summit. The two girls thought at the same moment. Karin shot from her seat with her hand wrapped tightly around Naruto's wrist, causing him to drop his water. Kuretsuchi did the exact same thing, but instead, grabbed her own teammates from their seats, causing them to spill their waters before they could even get a drink. Naruto was about to protest, but Karin flashed him a look that seemed familiar. Naruto looked back to the Iowa team to see that Kuretsuchi was doing the exact same to them. Thank you for the water. We'll be on our way. Naruto bowed before he and Karin broke off into full sprint. Junin-san, Kuretsuchi said with a different tone than what she used before. Get this message to the cages. I have information about Uzumaki Naruto and his companion that might seem interesting, especially to my grandfather. Understood, Kuretsuchi-sama. The Junin bowed. Will you go off and continue pursuing the Uzumaki? Sure. Why not? Kuretsuchi laughed. I was tasked to do so by the Hokage herself to test him. Might as well see how high of a tolerance level he has for pain. Akatsuchi and their teammates stared at Kuretsuchi with sad eyes and felt a small pang of sorrow for Naruto and Karin. Kuretsuchi gave them a look and glared menacingly before taking off after the golden-haired boy and the redhead. What the hell is the hero of the leaf doing with an Akatsuki? Ooh. Naruto and Karin were making great distance from the checkpoint and were already backing into the desert. So far they hadn't encountered any other teams, but they were sure that there would be opposition sometime soon, especially since there were only a few more hours left before the evening hit. Karin was worried that Kuretsuchi might have noticed who she was. The two Uzumaki jumped over a large cavern in the middle of the desert and landed safely on the other side. Sand was blowing in their faces as the winds picked up to a violent speed, nearly blowing them from their positions and into the cavern below. Naruto struggled to keep his footing and nearly slipped because of the sands whirling beneath his sandals. Karin, Naruto shouted. There was something strange about this cavern. Suddenly, images of his first time summoning Gamabunta flashed through his head. He looked down and realized that the cavern had the same build and physical terrain as the cavern back in Konoha. There was a heavy gust and pushed Naruto off his feet and into the cavern. Naruto, hold on. Karin caught his arm as quickly as possible, making sure that she wouldn't lose her grip. I've got you. The winds were now threatening to push her into the cavern as well. She looked down to see Naruto smirking at her and shaking her head. He mouthed the words, "It'll be alright," and released his grip around Karin's forearm. The redhead's eyes shot open as she screamed out his name, terrified of the prospect of him dying. Naruto shook his head, feeling the need to laugh at her naivety, and spun around in midair while speeding through hand seals. After looking around the cavern, he wanted to laugh at how easy it was, almost exactly like summoning Gamabunta. He bit his thumb and finished off the final seal and shot his hand forward and called the jutsu. But nothing happened. Naruto's smile dropped immediately. His heartbeat accelerated. He sped through another set of hand seals ready to try and summon another toad, but with no success. He looked over to the sides of the cavern walls, and quickly grabbed onto the ledges that jutted from the sides, only to be blown back and forced back into freefall state. What the? The cavern is designed to kill people. What is wrong with Suna? Naruto cried within his mind. He channeled in whatever senjutsu chakra he could muster and nearly felt his heart sink into his gut. The walls were covered in seals that were designed to chakra from jutsu, rendering techniques or anything revolving around the use of chakra completely useless. Within a few seconds, he felt his senjutsu chakra leave his body and enter the crevices of the walls. Naruto turned down and learned the hard way of why he shouldn't be such a show-off. Ooh. Karin stared in fear at what she just saw. Naruto was lying face down at the bottom of the cavern with a large pool of blood spreading around him. She sent out a quick blast of chakra to sense whether or not her eyes were playing tricks on her, but she quickly realized that Naruto's chakra signature wasn't responding. She couldn't sense it. She couldn't even sense the Kyuubi's chakra from within Naruto. Naruto. Karin whimpered softly as she stared at the boy lying at the bottom of the cavern. Please get up. The wind stopped, allowing the blaring hot sun to sizzle into her skin, but never had she felt so cold. The warmth that came with Naruto's chakra was gone, completely non-existent. It was a signature that she would never forget, one that she knew that she would always remember, one that she was looking forward to for the rest of her life. But now, it was gone. She waited a few minutes, knowing how Naruto usually is, but he continued to lie down at the bottom of the pit, face first, with a large pool of blood surrounding him. Karin knew that if Naruto wouldn't survive the fall, she wouldn't. She shook her head violently, knowing that there was no way that Naruto could die. She sent out another chakra blast, but this time, using as much concentrated chakra as possible, and did a distant diagnostic of Naruto's body, hoping to Kami that Naruto was still okay. What she sensed made her heart shatter. Everything was mush, jelly. His bones, shattered completely, his brain suffering from a massive hemorrhaging, and his skull was cracked in 8 different places. But what really hurt Karin? 3 of his ribs snapped and dug into his heart in 3 places, impaling the organ, stopping it completely. Tears formed, stinging at the corners of her eyes and threatened to fall, if she continued to stare at the boy at the bottom of the cavern. She sensed another group of chakra signatures and clenched her fists as the tears finally fell. She reached down and grabbed a handful of kunai and shuriken. She narrowed in on the source of the incoming chakra. It was Kuretsuchi. Karin shot to her feet and jumped up, hurling her weapons, blowing the Iowa shinobi off of their course, causing them to scatter. Karin grabbed another bundle of shuriken and started spinning on her heel while keeping a steady barrage kept on the Iwa shinobi. Kuretsuchi was surprised by Karin's sudden increase of skill and jumped for the redhead to take her on personally. Karin saw this and hurled the shuriken in a blind rage towards the Iwa kunoichi. Exclamation mark. Kuretsuchi jumped to the side dodging a large barrage of projectiles, but felt the sand slipping from beneath her feet. Her eyes widened in complete unaltered fear. Kuretsuchi sped through a few hand seals and slammed her hands into the ground, trying to form a wall of earth beneath her feet to bridge the gap, but the rocks that shot from the cavern walls merely crumbled and collapsed. With the chakra being siphoned from the stones, it made the bridge impossible to hold anything. What is this? Kuretsuchi started sliding down towards the opening of the cavern. She threw her arms back, in a wild attempt to keep her grip on the sands and rocks protruding from the ground around her. The sands started moving faster. Karin noticed this and Kuretsuchi knew it too. The redhead drew out a kunai and threw it towards Kuretsuchi's head. Now fall. Karin narrowed her eyes. The black-haired Iwa kunoichi did exactly what Karin thought she would, she dodged the attack. But because of how powerful the moving sand was, Kuretsuchi had no choice but to dodge and practically jump into the cavern. Kuretsuchi's eyes were never so wide, and never had she been so scared in her life. Karin glared at the Iwa kunoichi and hurled one more kunai, embedding it within the sand next to Kuretsuchi's face. Now's my chance. Kuretsuchi grabbed the kunai and turned ready to throw it back at Karin, but found that she was no longer there. The girl turned back and around as the sand had finally disappeared and the darkness of the pit was all she could see. She edged her arm back and hurled the kunai down towards the left side of the cavern walls, and threw up the tiger hand seal. Kai! The kunai and explosive tag exploded, breaking off large boulders and rocks from the side of the wall. She descended knowing that there was almost no way of getting out of the cavern without some injuries. She looked forward and found the blonde-haired hero of Konoha, covered in his blood and lying face down on the ground. She was deeply surprised at the scene. He was virtually untouchable so far in this exam, and yet, a simple tumble from the side of the cavern, he was dead. Kuretsuchi shut her eyes and got her body ready to take the full brunt of the impact with the rocks and boulders stacked upon each other. She turned onto her side and smashed right into the top boulders, and forced her way through each one, forming pebbles and little rocks. Once the smoke and dust died out, she was standing with her right arm limp, hanging at her side with blood pouring from the massive gashes up and down her arms and shoulder. She gritted her teeth and glared softly at the dead Uzumaki lying on the ground. Kuretsuchi limped over to his body and collapsed onto the side of the wall as well. She was just a few moments away from collapsing and passing out, but she was vigilant and tried her best to stay conscious. She limped forward to Naruto and simply broke down. Her body was slowly fading, as was the light. She placed an arm around the dead shinobi and shook her head before realizing that she herself was gone as well. Ooh! Karin stared in awe at what she'd just done. Kuretsuchi's chakra was flickering, but was slowly fading away. While the damage done to her body was nothing compared to Naruto's, she was surprised at the amount that the Iwa kunoichi had taken. Karin looked to Kuretsuchi's teammates to see them flabbergasted, but not angry. Don't come near me, Karin shouted threateningly, in a failed attempt to seem powerful. You two will join her if you come anywhere near me. Calm down, one of the other teammates shouted back while scratching the back of his head. We meant no real harm to you or the blonde. What? Karin glared and tightened her hold on her kunai. Her chakra started kneading. She wanted to see if they were lying. It's true, Akatsuchi said with a grunt. Your Hokage tasked us with keeping you and Naruto on your toes. What? Karin was wide-eyed. Any more and her eyes might even pop from their sockets. What do you mean? What are your true ranks? We were all already Chunin. Akatsuchi replied. Kuretsuchi is already getting groomed for Junin position. But, Karin looked back down the cavern and fell to her knees. Damn it. I probably just started something unintentionally. We need to get to the next checkpoint and tell them of what happened here. Ooh, the winds were piercing, despite the night being in the middle of summer. The bright white moon above shined down upon the entire desert as small desert animals and even the large ones scurried about, trying to make the most of the night and gather as much food as possible. Desert scorpions and snakes were, even in the night, the most dangerous hunters out. It didn't matter much to the kunoichi lying at the bottom of a dark cavern. She was slowly forced from her pain-induced sleep by the soft splotching of water onto her cheeks. The girl looked around with her dull pink eyes with confusion evident in her features. She clenched her fist and wrapped her arm over to her shoulder to find that it has been wrapped in a red cloth. Her entire body was sore, burning to the bone with pain, but the girl sat up anyway. The only light she had was the dim illumination of the moon. She looked around with her breath hitched. It was already night time. She looked to her side, but found an outline of a man in a pool of dried blood. She drew out a kunai with her good arm and struggled to her feet. There's no way in hell that Naruto could have survived that fall. Kuretsuchi growled as her kunai clicked. She stumbled slightly, but managed to put her hand on the wall of the cavern and used it as a crutch. Limping her way through the darkness, Kuretsuchi was seriously regretting getting up from the ground. Rustle. Her head snapped up and hurled the kunai in the direction of the sound. There was a loud thud and a small cry of pain. She quickly hobbled over through the darkness and found a dim, but orange light going through the cavern. She suddenly felt a burst of energy and ran over towards the source of the light and found Naruto sitting on a rock with a fire burning wildly in front of him. The surprising thing though, the fire wasn't using wood, just rocks. Naruto looked over to Kuretsuchi and gave her a small smile and motioned for the Aiwa girl to sit with him. Kuro shook her head but headed over anyway and plopped on a rock next to his. She trailed her eyes over his physical features and found nothing wrong, nor was there anything bruised. His haori, though, was torn and matted in all places and directions. The cloth used as a sling was apparently from the hem of his haori. While being lost in her muse, she completely forgot that she was actually really hungry. During her moment of unawareness, her stomach grumbled like a truck's engine and nearly had Naruto rolling. The boy held in his laughter and snapped Kuretsuchi from her thoughts with a desert rabbit on a stick. The girl looked at him with an incredulous look for a good 5 minutes before she realized that the boy was offering her some food to eat. Don't worry. I've made sure that the entire thing was cooked right. Naruto smirked. It's not going to jump off the stick and attack you. Sorry about that. Kuretsuchi laughed softly and took the rabbit. So, where are we? I have no idea really. Naruto shrugged. So you're telling me that you don't know what this place is? Kuretsuchi asked. I thought you and Jiraiya of the Sannin traveled all over the elemental nations for training. Oh, we did wait. Naruto caught himself. How did you know that? HMPH. Kuretsuchi huffed. I guess we should have a proper introduction. Agreed. You go first since you were the one that tried to kill me and my teammate for the entire day. Naruto laughed. Alrighty. Kuretsuchi is the name. Daughter of Kitsuchi and granddaughter of Unoki, the Sandaime Tsuchikage. The girl replied with a smirk. Judging by your reaction, you know of them. How can I not? Naruto replied. Training with Ero Sennin, he made me learn and memorize the current great shinobi of the different nations. Kitsuchi and Unoki were no different. Interesting. Oh well anyway, never mind. Deception is after all a shinobi's greatest weapon, right? Kuretsuchi smiled. Indeed. Naruto nodded his head. Well, I'm Uzumaki Naruto. Hero of Konoha. That's all you're going to give me? Kuretsuchi feigned a look of hurt. Is it because you don't know me that well? Hey, nice try. Naruto laughed. Just eat your damned rabbit and then we can try and find a way out of this stupid cavern. Naruto stared into the flames and released a sigh. Kuretsuchi was obviously thinking about something and it was beginning to bother him. He tried his hardest to pay no attention to her obvious thoughts, but it was starting to grate on his nerves. He slowly lowered his cooked rabbit and turned on his seat to face the black-haired girl. She merely looked him back in the eyes and looked back to her food. "What is it that you wanted to ask or say?" Naruto asked. "I won't do anything. So is that redhead your teammate, or is she?" Kuretsuchi used her hands trying to get what she was trying to ask across. "My girlfriend?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. "Yeah, to tell you the truth, I have no idea." Naruto grumbled softly. "We've kissed a lot, but we haven't made a relationship out of it. Not only that, there's another girl back in Konoha that I've been seeing, and then this other girl who confessed to loving me, and then there's—" "Forget I asked." Kuretsuchi deadpanned. "You Konoha shinobi are so strange. I like to think that it's just me." Ooh. The time around the fire went by quickly, leaving the two young adults with almost nothing to talk about. Kuretsuchi chose to hit the sack and sleep on the rocky floor ahead of Naruto while he went scouting for an exit. He spent a good 3 hours looking around through the cavernous bottom, but found no discernible exit or even entrance besides the opening above them. He was tired and wanted to rest. Little did Kuretsuchi know, his body was on fire every time he'd take a step, or even breathe. He was in pain, but didn't show it. Behind the scenes and deep within the recesses of his mind, his mother and inner demon were surprisingly working together to remove the ribs that entered his heart. So far, they were able to remove 2 of the ribs, but they weren't as bad as the final. One false move on Naruto's part or theirs, the sharp tip of the snapped rib would slice open his aorta no matter which way they go. And if that happens, Naruto would only have, even with Uzumaki blood, just a minute maximum to survive. Naruto had been through a lot of pain, but nothing could match getting a Chidori plunged through his chest, at least until now. The Kyuubi was having a headache from how important it was that he didn't kill his container. As much as the Kyuubi hated being caged, he knew that Naruto was something else. The Kyuubi sighed and went right back to channeling his chakra towards the bone and the heart, keeping it pumping and healing the holes formed in the organ. It was easier to heal his chest from the Chidori attack because Naruto was able to make the Chidori miss his heart, even if it was by a little, but this was a fall from Kami knows how many feet. This was an entirely different level of expertise. Something that the Kyuubi had never experienced in his immortal lifetime, especially since neither of his previous Jinchuriki were stupid enough to try and show off his skills when his teammate could have easily helped him up. The Kyuubi was laughing so hard when Kushina went on a rage about the stupidity of Naruto, but quickly shut his mouth and started channeling chakra into his body to strengthen it. He knew about the seals and what they do, and he even knew a loophole. The only way to beat the cavernous walls was to use Biju chakra. But the Kyuubi couldn't just load the blonde's body with Biju chakra because the chakra would go straight to his chakra reserves and into the blood, and straight to the heart, which was extremely weak at this point. If there was an overload, along with the chakra being used to move the bone out of place, he could end up causing the heart of rot and decay from the boy's chest, killing all 3 of them in the process. Damn humans and their need to show off. Kushina sighed from within the mindscape and picked her nails with a kunai that she fabricated. She sighed and stared at the dark walls while the Kyuubi continued his job of keeping his jailer alive. Kushina stood from her seat and paced back and forth, channeling her own chakra into the seal and making sure that her own will would be transferred to Naruto's heart, in an attempt to strengthen it. The Red Death of Konoha looked up at the Kyuubi with a smug look on her face and fabricated a chair. She unceremoniously plopped down onto the seat and looked at the giant fox with a funny look. "You know Kurama, you don't seem like such a big mean fox." Kushina chided with a shit-eating grin. If someone were to see this, they'd think that the great Kyuubi no Yoko was turning soft and protecting some teenager. "How many times do I have to tell you not to call me that?" Kurama roared, but Kushina didn't budge 1 inch and merely waved her hand back and forth in front of her nose. "You know, Kurama, your breath hasn't changed at all. Kushina laughed. I think you might need some breath. Why did it have to be too disrespectful, Uzumaki? Kurama sighed. At least with Mito, she was smart enough to respect my power. I respect your power, Baka Fox. You're just fun to piss off. Databane. Kushina yelled back. The feeling is mutual. Kurama suddenly had an evil glint in his eyes. Don't you say it, you Baka Fox. Kushina growled menacingly. Tomato. Ooh. Morning suddenly came, and Naruto was kicked awake by a restless Kuretsuchi. She was still using the walls as her crutch, but she was managing. The blonde, being the man that he was, he didn't care and suddenly hoisted the girl over onto his back, but the girl lost her grip with his arm, and accidentally slapped him just over his heart. Exclamation mark. Kurama roared. Oh no. Naruto rambled. The pain seared through his body, tightening his muscles and nearly making him go back into a near-death state. Blood was forced through his throat and out of his mouth. Naruto dropped Kuretsuchi and collapsed onto the ground, coughing out, spattering blood in all directions. He fell over onto his back and started coughing more blood, spraying his face and his clothing once more. Oh shit, Naruto. Kuretsuchi cried out. What's wrong? What did I do? Nothing. Kuro-chan, it wasn't your fault. Naruto groaned as a large trail of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth and onto the ground below. Kushina, the bone. Don't tell me. It's pierced the aorta. 12 hours earlier. Karin awoke to the sound of water. Her head was pounding and felt tightened. She tried to stand, but there were strange seals on her body that restricted her movement and made her legs almost completely worthless. She tried her hardest to get back up, but there were chains wrapped around her arms and legs. The chains went from her limbs and out towards two other people on the other side of the cave. One was a burly man with a large nose while the other was a shorter and skinnier man. They too were chained together with the chains leading up to Karin's own binds. The redhead looked around quite happy that whoever their attackers were, didn't remove her glasses. She took a deep breath to get a good look of her surroundings. She moved her arms around and felt that the 3 scrolls that she and Naruto had achieved were still with her. She bent her head down and pushed the glasses back up her nose and rested them perfectly at the bridge. Her crimson eyes trailed over and throughout the cave system. There was a series of 8 tunnels that went for who knows how far. Torches were placed at either side of each opening, giving the entire room a slight ambiance of uncertainty. On the far side of the room, there was a series of cages locked with multiple chains and bars to keep whatever was within, hidden. Karin struggled to keep her consciousness but continued to manage. There was a sickening feeling within her gut that told her that this was no longer the Chunin exams, at least this wasn't part of it. There's no way in hell that this is planned. Karin shut her eyes and started getting a good feel of the entire cavern system. Rooms were filled with strange shinobi and chakra signatures that she didn't recognize. This is something entirely different. If these were shinobi that I haven't sensed before, but were allied with Suna, then why would they be in questionable caves with 3 genin locked up? No, they have to be bandits or a part of Wait. No, it can't be. Karin's eyes widened when she got to the final signature. She nearly fainted when she sensed the chakra. It was completely explosive and filled with a strange fire, almost as if it were constantly feeding, never ending. She delved deeper and deeper, trying to see if she was right or just crazy. Her mind drew closer and closer. It's Deidara, but he's dead. She looked around with a confused face, as she started to sense more and more familiar chakra signatures that she was sure were gone. Many of whom were a part of the Akatsuki, while others were just fodder shinobi that she might or might not have had a role in killing. She struggled in her chains and barely held strong against the binds. She stared off into the dim lighting of the cave as new chakra signatures filled her senses. There were men and women of all sizes surrounding the room. One thing was certain. They weren't here for the exams, or rather, not for the same reason Karin was. Some people had malicious chakra that seemed to eat away at the air, giving Karin the sensation of tunnel vision. But nothing would be as bad as the Kyuubi's chakra, nothing. Hiro, Akatsuchi, Karin whispered out towards the two Iowa shinobi chained to the walls on the opposite side of the cave. The two teammates of Kuretsuchi groaned and looked up at their fellow prisoner. Akatsuchi had a massive cut over his large nose with a dangerous-looking gash over his forehead and a black eye. Hiro was disheveled with a few scars on his cheek, but otherwise fine. The two were chained quite loosely. Well, Akatsuchi was just too damn fat for the chains that these bandits had, so they wrapped chains around his arms and body, completely restraining the fat man. "Are you two all right?" Karin groaned. "Just a headache is all," Hiro replied. "Do either of you remember what happened? Where are we?" "From what I can tell, it's a hideout for some bandit group, or something of that sort," Karin replied. "I am sensing a lot of chakra signatures in all directions, many are quite large and probably Junin-leveled reserves." "Are you sure?" Hiro asked. "Positive." Karin nodded. "From the chakra that I'm sensing, there is a probability that there are at least 5 shinobi of S class or higher. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure." "I see." Akatsuchi nodded his head. "Well, these bandits haven't done their research well, it seems." "What do you mean?" Karin looked at him with a confused look. "These are wrought iron chains. They can be easily broken with my ninjutsu." Akatsuchi smirked. "Just watch, Karin-san." The shinobi leaned his head back and quickly shot it down, regurgitating a large flow of rocks and pebbles that merged together, forming two golems that quickly wrapped their teeth around the chains and began to eat the metal. Akatsuchi suddenly felt rejuvenated. It seemed that the chains were imbued with chakra. Ironic that the tools used to keep them bound were the instruments to their escape. Akatsuchi pushed himself from the wall and limped over to Karin and grabbed the chains from the wall, snapping them from their bases. The red-headed girl gave Akatsuchi a nod and walked over towards the center of the room and started channeling as much chakra as possible, and still be able to suppress it. Akatsuchi went ahead and removed the chains binding Hiro. Hiro ran over towards one of the entrances of the cave and placed a hand on the rock, only to be stopped by Karin. She looked at him and shook her head slowly, making sure that Hiro got the message. From what she could tell, there were at least 30 men down that tunnel and probably 13 in the 2 tunnels on either side of the one Hiro was about to go into. After successfully saving their lives, Karin spun on the heel of her sandals and walked back and forth, pacing with a thinking pose stretched on her face. She studied the patterns of patrol and the amount of shinobi within each patrol. Hell, even the entire compound of wherever the hell they were. One thing was for certain. They were underground, but most importantly of all, Naruto was gone. She sighed deeply and nearly felt the tears form once again in the corner of her eyes. Naruto was really gone. She looked around and quickly pinpointed on one of the tunnels that lead towards a large but thin opening. She motioned for the 2 men to follow and quickly took off without the use of a flame or light to brighten her path, but instead, she merely relied on her sensing ability. She took multiple lefts and rights, and almost even sprang a few booby traps that she might have forgotten of. But even though there was no light, she could still see as clearly as can be. She stopped when the sound of rushing water blasted in her ears. There was water nearby. That meant a water source. The rushing sound made her parched throat get drier. She could sense the rushing waves, but she could not sense where the obstacles were. She looked left and right, trying her hardest to catch on to whatever escape path there is, but it was nigh impossible to do so in complete darkness, even with her special ability. Suddenly, from behind, Akatsuchi and Hiro showed up with torches and bloodied rock clubs in their hands. Akatsuchi gave her a nod and looked around, illuminating the entire cavern. Akatsuchi narrowed his eyes at one point in the dark horizon and found a dim light at the end of the darkness, directly ahead of them. Akatsuchi grabbed Karin and started hauling through the tunnel, but because of his excitement, the echo and vibration went through the tunnel and joined in with the atrium that the other prisoners were in. From there, the vibrations shot out and entered the other tunnels and led to the defenders. Karin sensed their sudden change in emotion as their once blue chakra turned into a light shade of red to signify their anger or rage or even the readiness to end the life of someone else. Karin screamed and asked Akatsuchi to drop her. The large shinobi complied and slowly lowered her onto the ground, but just as her feet touched the ground, an arrow snagged just in between her heels, nearly impaling her feet in their power. Karin took a deep breath and sighed. This wasn't what she wanted to deal with so early in her escape. We need to get to the end of this tunnel this instant. Karin roared as she ran farther ahead than Akatsuchi and Hiro. Shouts and screams echoed through the cave as men and women, shinobi and kunoichi, drew their weapons. Their unsheathing weapons made the hairs behind Karin's neck stand. She didn't dare to look back, but she could sense their intent. They were intending to kill them. What they were going to do with their bodies afterwards, Karin didn't know, nor did she want to know. All she wanted to do was get out of the cave system with the other two shinobi. It was slightly confusing to her. The last time she was conscious, she and the other two shinobi were in the desert running from the cavern that killed both Naruto and Kuretsuchi. Then, from that point on everything was a blur, almost as if their memories were wiped, almost wiped. Karin still retained some memories, and even some images of the time in imprisonment and the time that led up to it. She shut her eyes to try and drown out the shouts echoing around her, but she couldn't get the chakra signatures from her head. Every time her eyes would close, the chakra from the shinobi in the other tunnels would funnel into her sensing abilities and completely shroud her field of view, and nearly blind her from all sides. Suddenly, a shuriken whizzed right past her ear, nearly cutting off a few strands of hair from behind her right ear. The shuriken embedded into the wall in front of her and Akatsuchi. The two nearly froze in their tracks, but Karin was the first to shake herself from their fear-induced reverie. She quickly grabbed the burly shinobi and grabbed Hiro with her other arm, and the three hightailed it from the caver system. As they ran, shuriken and kunai were thrown at them from behind, surprisingly, missing the three every shot. It was almost as if they were purposefully missing. Either that or these shinobi were the shittiest shinobi Karin had ever encountered. How fast can you two release ninjutsu? Karin shouted as kunai and shuriken clanked and bounced off the rocks and boulders lining the sides and walls of the tunnel system. As fast as they need to be. Akatsuchi replied while speeding through hand seals. Doden. Doryuaheki. The tunnel behind them collapsed on top of the shinobi chasing them. Their screams were the last thing heard before the tumbling rock and bouncing pebbles rung in their ears, drowning out all other sounds. But all of a sudden, one of the wall sections burst off from the wall and shot out, blocking the pathway, nearly causing Karin to stumble over the attack, and cause her to fall behind. Akatsuchi saw this though and channeled chakra into his body and simply bore through the obstacles, showering the walls and those behind and in front with pebbles, dust and dirt. More and more obstacles were shot out at them, but the burly shinobi simply bashed through them, rendering them completely useless. Karin was grabbed by Akatsuchi and placed onto his back, and the three shinobi took off through the cave and out into the open. Akatsuchi punched through the white covering of the entrance of the cave and quickly slowed himself down along with Hiro. In front of them was a beautiful oasis with palm trees and fresh water. Karin was about to get off of Akatsuchi's back, but there was a sudden disturbance with the normal chakra clouds. There were some really powerful shinobi with chakra reserves equal to that of Anbu commanders and the like. The most powerful of them all was apparently staring at him through his training. The girl quickly pushed Akatsuchi forward as one of the powerful chakra signatures shot a fire technique at the three. In a sorry attempt to fight back, Karin missed with one of her lesser shinobi attacks while Hiro and Akatsuchi were shooting rocks and boulders in different direction, or at least whatever direction Karin said that the enemies would be in. No one could tell for sure, but since Karin was known for being a censor, they knew that she was most likely going to be fine. 10 hours earlier, scorpions of varying size wandered through the desert sands, picking at different rodents that chose to come out at this time of the evening. The sun was falling and heat was fleeting. Animals rose from their hideouts and began to run over the desert in search for food and possibly empty holes to lay their young or even eggs. Snakes slithered about, devouring their prey without a second thought. The desert was quiet for the entire hour, minus the howls of desert wolves and foxes. Rattles at the ends of rattlesnakes shook and jangled, breaking the attention of some of the other more potent hunters of the desert biome. It was relentless, trying its hardest to eat as much as it can before the hawk or eagles can swipe him off the ground. But everything was converging for one spot. It was a large oasis in the middle of a hole. Up into the air were walls that were almost as high as the cavern that Naruto and Kuretsuchi fell into. From the edges of the hole, sand flowed over the side, filling the bottom with sand and dirt, making an oasis underground. Rocks were suddenly moved from the rest of the pattern of the hole. Soon enough, the rocks exploded outwards, showering the inhabitants with pebbles and stones. From the cloud of debris stood 3 shinobi, 2 male and 1 female. The female of the group was a bespectacled redhead. The other 2 were average men of Iowa. One was a 6-foot-tall boy with a fat build and a nose to match. Next to him was another boy, but he instead was only about 5 feet and 3 inches with a normal-sized nose and dark black hair. They were covered in dirt and small scars, but they were managing. Karin took a deep breath and shut her eyes and gasped with surprise. They weren't being followed anymore. It seemed that whoever held them captive gave up on them escaping. It was definitely something she was looking forward to. Karin opened her eyes and motioned for the 2 Iowa shinobi behind her to follow. She followed her ears, and soon enough, she found the oasis with flowing water. She and the other shinobi charged for the oasis, scaring the desert animals and creatures back into their hiding holes in the sand and rock face. Karin dumped her face into the water and soaked up as much as she could. She was ridiculously thirsty, especially after being in a cave for an undetermined amount of time. She really needed this. She looked up into the sky and found that the night was dark and the moon was up. She was in awe of what she saw though, stars. There was an ocean of stars flooding the night sky with their lights and wonderful colors. She could see star clusters and even gas clouds from far in the universe. But what really got her attention was the North Star twinkling in the far distance. She looked down and looked at the other shinobi with her. Hiro had a massive gash on his back from a Fuma shuriken not too long ago, and Akatsuchi was still trying to nurse his wound from a bladed trap from within the tunnel. She looked back down at her wrist and found that her watch was still operational. The time was about 2000 hours. Only 4 hours until the second day of the second stage of the exam. We were running through the tunnel for about, I'd say, 2 hours maximum. Karin surmised. So we woke up at about 6 p.m. How long were we in there? Naruto and Kuretsuchi fell at around midday, so 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. Well, that doesn't matter. What does matter though is, who were those shinobi? And what were they doing with dead nuke nins? Karin kept thinking but shut her mind off and dunked her face back into the clear water of the oasis. She shot her head from the water and ran a hand through her hair to help dry it off a bit, but suddenly, a blast of emotion shot through her body. It overwhelmed her at first and nearly caused her to topple over and into the water of the pool. Her eyes were wide. She pushed her glasses up to the bridge of her nose and focused on the emotion. It was like laughter or even happiness. There was some worry and even some wariness in the emotions, but it was so amazing, Karin couldn't ignore it. She gathered some chakra and soon enough, tears began to fall. She gripped her head and collapsed onto her knees as the emotions grew stronger and stronger. Her chakra fluctuated in a way that said it was excited. The emotions were surrounding her like a warm blanket. But she continued to cry. She gripped her head tightly, trying to make sure that she was ing up. Her face scrunched up as the tears fell harder and added to the oasis pool. She bit her lips softly and tried her hardest to hold back her hiccups. She trembled and shook. There was only one person who had emotions like that. There was only one person who can cause her to become like this. Naruto's alive. Ooh. 8 hours earlier. Karin followed the trail of Naruto's chakra as best as she could, while trying her hardest to keep her own emotions from clouding her vision. It's true that when you're emotionally compromised, you are the most dangerous. It's a fact when you're someone like Karin. If she didn't keep her emotions reined in, she might lose track of Naruto's own trail and end up going in circles trying to find her own chakra signature. She followed the cave systems trying to build an imaginary map of the entire cave and tunnel complex, but ended up finding a lot of dead ends and rooms filled with enemy shinobi. She placed her hand against the walls and sent out a small chakra burst to act as a sonar wave. She sensed the chakra bounce around and wash over rooms and over other tunnels, but there was one that the wave's chakra moved faster over and even went around a few times before returning back to her. If it's moving that fast, there's only one meaning: fire. Karin placed her fingers underneath her chin and went through the informations for a few moments and looked back down at her watch. It was 11 p.m. The moon was almost right above them and was already blaring down onto the hole in the ground and started illuminating the tunnels, making them start to lose their way once more. This place is a death trap, almost as if it was designed to make unwanted visitors or hell, even prisoners like us, to never make it out alive. Karin groaned. I need to get to the other room and help Naruto and Kuratsuchi. We need to get the out of this godforsaken hole of a trap and get to the cages and tell them of what happened. She followed a path that was barely visible, and almost seemed like another dead end, but Karin motioned for the two shinobi with her to follow anyway. They were nervous, especially since they were burning through nighttime that could be used for sleeping. Akatsuchi was carrying a sleeping hero on his back while the three traveled through yet another tunnel. This was probably the shittiest test Karin has been in. Even memorizing Orochimaru's underground complexes weren't this hard. Karin kept at it though, and led the two shinobi behind her to the best of her abilities. Her crimson-red eyes examined each rock and each crevice trying to make sure that she didn't miss any hidden rooms or even hidden switches. Suddenly, a warm and powerful gust of chakra hit her, making her knees weak. Naruto was smiling. She could sense his dream and how calm it was. Her mind, too, became hazy and almost unresponsive, but that didn't matter. She turned back to see Akatsuchi and Hiro plopped against the wall, fast asleep with a blanket over themselves. Might as well sleep too. Karin yawned and yet another wave flowed over her, this time, blowing her from her feet and onto her back. But, instead of hitting hard rock, she was met with the soft feel of waving grass. The warmth of the sun was perfect for her bare arms and bare navel. The sun, though, was suddenly blocked by the silhouette of a man's head. The girl squinted her eyes and soon enough, the shadows became dim and Naruto's face began to take shape. A breeze rolled in, blowing through their hair and through the long grass surrounding them. He had a small smile as he looked over her features. She was blushing madly, but she too was smiling. Suddenly, she flipped Naruto over and straddled the boy for a good few minutes while keeping their eyes locked, red and blue. Karin gulped softly as a ball was stuck in her throat. She didn't know what to say. Apparently, neither did Naruto. The two of them giggled like madmen, before bursting into laughter. Karin pulled the blonde from the grass and placed her forehead against his, making sure that their eyes remained locked with one another. His breath was heavy, but smelled a lot like minty ramen. Karin was about to laugh once more, but Naruto pushed forward and laid her against the grass, but this time, with his lips pressing against her. Her hands began to roam up and down his chest with her left hand wrapping around his shoulder while the other going for the zipper of his jacket. As their kiss grew hotter, she began to zip his jacket down to reveal a shirtless body underneath with muscles that she always dreamed of placing her hands against. Naruto ed when her warm hands were placed against his cold chest. Soon enough, she began to work on her own shirt and zipped it right open, allowing her S to pop free of her jacket. The two of them broke their kiss and stared at one another, as they both moved as fast as possible to remove the clothes from their chests. Karen's face was on fire, as was Naruto's. He leaned back in for another kiss. Suddenly, there was this strange feeling at her side, almost as if someone was kicking her. The image started fading and soon enough, Naruto disappeared. The sun and the grass disappeared, the warm gusts of wind disappeared. The smell of minty ramen vanished. Now, she was left with the dimly lit darkness of the cave she fell asleep in. Next to her were Akatsuchi and Hiro staring at her with worried expressions. Karin looked up at them and realized that she was blushing quite heavily. Her body was covered in sweat and her hands were in rather inappropriate places. Her eyes widened from behind her glasses. She at least had enough dignity to look away. She growled slightly and the two Iowa boys quickly got the message. Holy shit, I was that wet. Karen's eyes widened and her breath hitched. This is not good. I need some alone time with Naruto soon. She retracted her hand from within her shirt and from her pants and quickly brushed herself off, trying to retain any dignity she had left. She stood up with her eyes trailing around in different directions and quickly looked down at her watch. It's 5 in the morning. Karin sighed. I guess we should just go ahead and continue looking. She walked over towards one of the walls and started knocking chakra into the stones, vibrating the walls and sending vibrations back towards her. She need to find the two shinobi locked on the other side. She dashed through the stones when she sensed Naruto's body from the vibrations. But there was something that astounded her too. 2 of the 3 bones that stabbed the boy's heart were removed completely. A smile formed on her face when she found that his heart was completely intact and working perfectly. She looked over to the side to see Akatsuchi gasping for air. Karin tilted her head slightly, but then Hiro came out with a chocolate bar and shoved the candy into the fat boy's mouth. That was exactly what I needed. Akatsuchi sighed. Oh Kami, he's exactly like Choji. Karin said with wide eyes. She shook her head and walked ahead of the 2 boys, knowing that they were probably still tired. She traced her hands against the walls and followed the trail of chakra she sent out. There was a sudden spark in the back of her mind. She took off into the rocky cavern while calling for the 2 shinobi behind her to follow. They groaned and stumbled to their feet, but they quickly realized that Karin was way ahead of them. Ooh, present time. Karin was running for almost 3 hours straight, much to the ire of the 2 Iowa shinobi. She punched through walls and rocks with strength that she only reserved for when she was pissed off, and she had successfully terrified the 2 boys with not only her strength, but also her innate babbling. The poor redhead was shouting incoherent words and indecipherable sentence structures, which had the 2 boys worrying about her mental state. She jumped up when she sensed that Naruto's chakra was getting stronger and stronger. She edged her fist back and rammed it into a wall, just a few yards away from the blonde. Once the debris cleared, the girl plowed through the smoke and rolled out into the rocky floor below. Once she gained her footing back, she looked back up through the sky and realized that it was once again morning. The sun was barely able to light the caver because of how deep it was. Looking around, she could smell a fire and the remnants of what seemed to be rabbit or some form of meat. She motioned for the 2 shinobi behind her to follow and kept her back to the cavern walls. She threw up the tiger hand seal, and received a better picture of Naruto and Kuretsuchi's situation. As it was, Kuretsuchi had successfully awoken Naruto from his sleep.